Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're not going to work on the V6 MR2. Instead, we're going to be working on my brother's Skyline. This car already has a intercooler kit, but honestly, it's pretty janky and beat up. At some point, this was someone's track car, and it clearly shows, although that's not really the biggest deal to my brother and I, because we track our cars, so having a less than pristine example is totally fine. In this box, we got the full replacement intercooler kit, and considering the car already has a kit on it, it should be a pretty easy install, I hope. Everything came really well packaged. There's some minor scuffs, but honestly, that's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. In terms of what came in it, obviously we have the intercooler. There's 3 pipes and then this bag that's filled with couplers and whatnot. The kit also came with some instructions. I looked them over. I don't know how to read Japanese, but everything looks like it's pretty self-explanatory. I know you will have to drill 1 hole, but since this car already has a kit, that really shouldn't be an issue there. The kit that's currently on the Skyline looks similar to the one that we got. So I wonder if the one that's currently on the car is potentially like a knockoff. Jesus and I have looked through this and we haven't seen any like name branding on top of it. So like here, there's nothing that says Greddy compared to over here on the top of this one, it does say Greddy right there. The install process should be pretty easy. I know I'm gonna have to take off the front bumper. As I mentioned earlier though, this car is in rough shape, so it's really easy. Each end is held on by zip ties right there. So we'll just snip it off on both sides. And then there are some plastic body pins here that will undo, and she'll literally come off in just a minute or 2. The bumper came off in like literally a minute, super easy. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned earlier, this was definitely someone's track car. That's what Asus knew when he purchased it. And there's things like a roll bar in it and whatnot. But it's once he got the car, that's when he realized it was actually a drift car because it has a welded diff and of course things like the bumper being held on with zip ties. I started looking around the car just because I've never done this job before and I wanted to see what I was gonna get into. And it looked like, as I mentioned earlier, that all I'm gonna have to do is just remove the intercooler piping, remove the intercooler, and then I should be able to put the new one back on, and that's when I found this. That is the driver's side intercooler piping, and this is where you're supposed to make a hole. Instead of just drilling a hole like a normal person would have done, it looks like someone took like hand shears to make the hole in the chassis, and that's just horrible workmanship. Considering the quality of the work that's been done with this car, I think taking everything apart will be the easy thing. It's when I put it back together, my gut tells me I'm probably going to run into some fitment issues just because, again, the quality of work. The intercooler kit came out super easy. Thankfully, it's aftermarket. I've heard that the OEM ones can be a bit of a pain. I've never had to take one off of an R32, so can't really touch on that. I can say though that this intercooler is in pretty rough shape. You can see where the top was smashed in. Between both kits, the parts are identical, but they're not exactly the same. You can see that both of these pipes are lined up exactly the same, and the new one is considerably longer by, you know, at least a few inches. At this point, it's time to start putting everything back together. In addition to obviously the intercooler, the intercooler piping, it comes with some couplers, and I didn't realize this at first, but it does actually come with some hardware. The instructions actually show that the horn should be relocated, and it does come with the bracket to do that. There's 2 brackets. I believe it's this one on the right. You're supposed to screw it in here, and that would relocate the horns further back so it's out of the way and not hitting the intercooler. In my situation, the horns aren't even connected, so there's just this miscellaneous wire like hanging out there. The horns are down there. The connectors that are just not plugged in are different than those. So that's something I'm gonna have to figure out. Having a working horn on this car is really important just because it's a safety thing, but if, you know, someone's gonna run into you, etc. So that's probably gonna get like done sooner rather than later. It's not gonna be like the hole for the intercooler piping. The plan is to address that this coming winter when we pull the engine out and just freshen stuff up. Off camera, I just went ahead and removed the horns. It's not like they're working anyways. And then the wiring that was there, instead of just like cutting it, because I don't want to just cut random things that I have no idea where they go to, I decided just to kind of tuck the wiring off to the side so I can address this down the road. And with that, we can start installing the new intercooler. It's going to be a pretty simple process. I'll get the intercooler attached here, and then at the very bottom, there's two holes somewhere along here, one on this side and one on this side, and it'll just screw back in. I'm not anticipating that I'll have to trim anything off the front crash bar, considering the other intercooler was on there. But I think if I was the first person to install a front mount kit on this car, there's a chance it's really common to have to like trim here and there to make things fit. The intercooler is not exactly bolting right up like it should be, but I don't blame the kit, and let me show you. The bottom of the intercooler has these tabs, and it's supposed to bolt onto the chassis. And I know it's a little hard to see, but right next to where this screw is bolted in, there's actually an OEM hole right there. For whatever reason, it doesn't actually line up with the OEM hole, but the intercooler does line up with the hole that was made by someone previous. My thought process is that the car had some type of front end collision and the front end got tweaked because of that. It's not really the end of the world. The intercooler is not like hitting anywhere else, so I'll just use those holes that were made before, and I think the rest of it should go in like it's supposed to. Everything's been going back together very smoothly, except for this last pipe. My issue is, you know, the couplers are obviously tight. So what I'm gonna just do is remove the battery, and I'll be able to grab the intercooler piping as I snug or connect the last coupler. Then she's all back together. The kit is officially installed, and I gotta say the fitment overall was okay. I was a little nervous that there'd be a lot of issues just because, you know, this car is a bit of a basket case, but overall not bad. Really the only big issue that I ran into was the tabs here not lining up, or the holes for the tabs not lining up on the bottom of the intercooler. But again, I really think the car was in a wreck at some point, so it's hard to really fault the kit for that. One thing that I did notice though is that because of how big the pipe is here, if the fan's not trimmed, it would actually come into contact. Whoever owned the car before my brother, they had already gone through and trimmed the fan. So when I was placing everything, I had to make sure that I left room so it's not contacting the engine. It might underload, but we're gonna see. It should not hopefully come in contact with the fans, because that'd be a big issue. This is again something the previous owner did to this car, but you can see this is part of the crash member or the front crash support, and this tab has been bent. I'm not exactly sure what it's for, but there's one on this side, and then if we come to the other side, there's one that's been cut right there as well. So that's something to consider if you're going to do this kit. Also, you'll need to trim your bumper. Again, the bumper's already been trimmed on this car. This is the inside of it. You can see where someone trimmed around here to make the piping fit. They also did the same thing on the other side. With the bumper back on, we can see that we don't have to trim any additional pieces of the bumper. Of course, if you had, or if your bumper hadn't been trimmed yet, you'd have to do some trimming here, as I mentioned earlier. And on this side, it would be the same thing. You'd have to trim portions there. The kit's fully installed now, and I gotta say, overall, I'm actually pretty happy with it. There wasn't really any big surprises, at least in regards to the kit itself. The only thing that I am a little worried about is just whether or not this pipe's gonna come in contact with anything. I am excited to see how the car performs now, because we did have some issues with boost leak on this, the couplers, but also the intercooler itself. If you guys got any questions, drop them down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them. Other than that, see you guys in the next video.